Grit examined the situation he and Eliza now found themselves in, glancing round at the well-armed men that surrounded the area, and then down at the medical supplies at his feet. He realized their decision had already been made for them. "Well, I guess we'll be coming with you then," Grit said, his voice shaky as his eyes were once again glued to the body of the man their leader had just put down. "Good to hear. Climb into the back. You'll be riding with me," the burly man said, hooking a thumb toward the back door of the Humvee that he currently stood on. Grit looked over nervously at Eliza, who had at this point pressed close against him, with one of her hands gripping his for comfort. Seeing her shaking and noticing that everyone besides the two of them were strapped with some kind of weapon, Grit stepped up and into the assault vehicle. Once inside, they were joined by the large man who had introduced himself as the leader. He strapped himself into the driver's seat, his eyes watching them through the rearview mirror. "Well, you two seem to be the only survivors left in this place. I know you must be scared as hell after what you just saw me do. But I promise, if you're good to us and follow our rules, we'll be good to you. The name's Dallas, by the way. Although, most people in my camp just call me the Leprechaun." "The Leprechaun? That's silly." Eliza giggled. A small smile appeared on Dallas's face. "Yeah, I think so too. But you know, if it helps make them smile after everything they've been through, I don't mind it much. Now, there'll be expectations for you when you get back to camp, young man." Grit tensed in his seat as the vehicle started to move. "What expectations, and what is going on? You said before it was bad. How bad? I haven't seen much except what was happening in the asylum." A look of surprise made its way onto Dallas's face. "You all didn't hear about anything that's been going on." Dallas sighed. "That's fair, I guess. You were locked up in there. And us out here, well, we're still barely piecing everything together. I guess I'll start back when I was in the military, so you know where I came from. And we'll go from there. That okay with you two?" Grit and Eliza nodded their heads, and Dallas began his story. "Staff Sergeant Dallas Vasero, U.S. Marine Corps. You stand accused of Article 90, assault of a commissioned officer. Article 92, failure to obey a direct order. And Article 94, sedition. How do you plead?" Sergeant Dallas clenched his fists tighter and gritted his teeth. He knew that smug lieutenant was somewhere in here, enjoying the show. "Guilty, Your Honor." The military judge adjusted himself in his chair. "Very well. We shall proceed with the hearing." The prosecutor stood from behind the bench. "Your Honor, if I may begin." The judge gave a nod. "Staff Sergeant Dallas, during your mission in Kabul, you were assigned 1st Marine Radar Battalion MARSOC and placed under 2nd Lieutenant Orritt's platoon. On 23 May, you were sent on assignment to capture a confirmed terrorist cell. At 0:30, the orders were given to commence operation with KOS orders. All targets were considered hostile. Upon entering, you failed to fire on 3 targets. Lieutenant Ortiz eliminated the hostiles and took point. After securing a few points, you failed to fire on the target, returning at which point you tackled Lieutenant Ortiz to the ground and proceeded in a brutal assault on a commissioned officer. Ordinarily, I would have thought they'd shoot scum like you on sight." Dallas felt the heat rising behind his ears, and his teeth clenched tighter. "But instead, 2 members pulled you from his unconscious body. Your entire unit now stands under sedition." Dallas couldn't hold back any longer. "They were goddamn children. Not a single one of them even had a weapon, sir." The judge pawed his chin and looked back at the prosecutor, who continued, "Well, we could prove that. That was, if your helmet unit was enabled as mission... You know damn well all of us were told to go dark for this mission. The judge stood from his chair, the gavel slamming onto his desk. The small courtroom went silent. I'm placing your unit on terminal leave, pending investigation. The prosecutor looked at the judge. Sir, you can't. He gave a stern look. I can, and will. Adjourned. A small gavel landed, and a small uproar erupted. 2 guards escorted Dallas to the front, where he was met and stopped by General Bradford. Leave him with me, if you please. The military police escorts gave him a short salute and marched off. He was led to a large office at the top of the building. Have a seat, Sergeant. You've had a hell of a week, huh? Dallas wiped the sweat accumulated on his head away. I take it I owe you the thanks for saving me a trip to Leavenworth? The general smiled. Far from easy, I assure you. But I'll be damned if I put you at fault for what happened. Personally, I'd like to see that Oritz brought up on war crime charges. We were given bad intel, and the order to halt the operation didn't come until after the mission was underway. Diplomacy of the arduous variety is taking place, and Kabul points their finger in our direction. Not that Washington would admit it. Bottom line, we need you to keep quiet about what happened. Just like the higher-ups to sweep this under the rug. The general stood and walked over to a small curio, where he revealed a very expensive-looking bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. Dallas, I'm going to be forward with you. Whether you like it or not, this thing is going hush. I'm giving you the chance to walk away without sitting behind bars as a scapegoat. I promise. They'd release a completely fabricated story about you killing those civilians. He felt the heat building again, red coloring his cheeks. And what about Oritz? A half-full glass was set in front of him. He walks. Hands are tied on that one, I'm afraid. Seems as though he's got friends in high places. Dallas let out a sigh and took the bottle instead of the cup that was put in front of him, taking greedy gulps until it was cleaned. Christ, what a world. He was led back downstairs, where 2 military escorts took custody of him. He was led back to a holding facility, and then promptly released with his belongings. They told him to head to personnel, where he'd be given his plane ticket back to the sticks. Months of alcoholic stupor went by, and any time he tried to call his friends from the service, the line went dead. He knew he was being watched, and his suspicions were confirmed when he tried to send an email, and instead it came back from an unknown sender. I don't think so, written in the subject line, and a message that wouldn't load when accessed. After the pitiful stipend he called his booze money ran out, he finally decided it was time to rejoin society. Each time he left his house, there was a large van parked up the road from his little suburban trailer home. This time, as he walked by, he waved at him. No need for subtlety, eh, boys? He spat some of the Copenhagen he'd been chewing on the hood of their vehicle. Best take a walk to town. Find some work. Most places turned him away when they found out he was still in the service, and that he wasn't really sure whether his discharge would be honorable or not. Luckily, the fellows out at the sawmill never gave 2 looks at a helping hand. This led him to working with some questionable characters, one in particular, a thin, pale guy named Noah, who had a real bad mouth on him for sure. Got him in more fights than the little guy really should have picked. Dallas had to admit he admired his no-fucks attitude enough, though. But an honest man ought to know when to fold a hand of cards. After a hard day's work at the mill, he met up with some co-workers at the pub. Life went by all right, he guessed. Put on a bit of a stomach, but kept most of his muscle, thanks to the hard labor. Never heard from the damned service, and of course they stopped paying him. Another slow day they'd be sitting at the poison house when Catherine comes in Real tomboy of a woman, easy on the eyes, but definitely a closet junkie. She said she'd scored some kind of new stuff. Cord was the name he overheard her ranting about. When he saw her one day after work, he stopped her. She was looking much healthier and seemed to be in a real upbeat mood. "Hey there, Kathy, you seem to be doing well." She smiled a yellow-toothed smile, displaying that many of her teeth were missing. "Yeah, I've been cleaning myself up. Only taking that cord now. It's really been helping me feel better. They say it's supposed to treat depression, and maybe that's what I got." He gave a weak smile. "Well, just be careful. Hate to lose you. You outwork most of the boys out here." She laughed and waved to him, and then drove off. After that day, she stopped coming to work, and then word got around that she'd bitten some poor guy's ear off. Dallas was out at a local bar, talking to some coworkers when he heard the news. "Junkies, am I right?" Carlos scoffed. He was a real burly fella, the kind of person who probably would have made a great Marine if he didn't have a bishop tattoo on his arm, a symbol that, in the area, signified allegiance to one of the local street gangs. The two of them threw back another beer, and before long most of the bar had grown quiet, as the television started blaring an emergency message. "Attention, attention. This is a National Defense Agency announcement. The CDC has just issued a warning of a new street drug known as Cord. Anyone who's come into contact with the drug or has been subject to a known user should report to their local healthcare facility immediately. The infection caused by the drug is considered extremely contagious and incites violent behaviors in its users." "Would you look at that? Guess that shit is real serious stuff." Carlos laughed and took another swig. "Further information will be passed as information becomes available." The sound of breaking glass tore the attention from the TV. A medium-built guy, sitting with Noah, fell to the ground and began convulsing violently. Dallas ran over to assess the man, having some medical training, but stopped short after realizing the man was missing his left ear. Just as suddenly as this all started, it stopped. The body went still, and the chest stopped moving altogether. The bartender ran over, but he quickly pushed himself back. "There is a good chance this man is infected. Get away from him." The body twitched a few times, and then the face began to split down the center, opening to a sickening flower of flesh, lined with a jagged maw. Carlos grabbed a nearby pool cue. "Oh, hell no. Not Miles, Holmes." He broke it over his knee and speared the creature through its chest. It continued to twitch and began to stand up. Several gun claps deafened the bar. Noah had pulled out a shabby-looking Tarkov and blasted a hole into its neck. Blood splattered behind it, covering the bartender, who had run around Dallas. Dallas reached for the weapon, then wrenched it away from Noah's shaking hand. He protested, but a quick jab to the face calmed him down real quick. A swift shot between, what was left of its eyes, leveled the creature. "Listen," he said, pointing the pistol at the barkeep. "You need to stay away from everyone. You're most likely infected now." The man started to cry, and turned and ran out the door. He forced himself not to shoot the man against his better judgment. Part of him knew it was heartless, but all of him knew that he shouldn't be taking a chance. But he couldn't bring himself to shoot a man in the back. "Did anyone else get any blood on them?" The 5 or 6 people who hadn't started to run after the gun fired all eyed each other. The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a butter knife. Sirens were heard outside. "Give me my gun back!" Noah had pulled himself to his feet. His hands were now gripping his face, fingers digging into his cheeks as he contemplated the current situation. "Not a chance. You don't want to have this on you anyway when the cops get here." Noah looked to the ground, then walked out to the 2 police cars and ambulance that sat outside. "Hands behind your head, now!" All of them complied, and very quickly they found themselves held up in a cell together. He told the police about the infection, why the murder had taken place, but no one seemed to pay him any mind. A couple of days passed with no bail. The police radio that sat in the next room squawked incessantly, and slowly they saw less and less of the officers in the precinct, while Dallas and several of the others in the cell with him shouted out to the officers. No answers came to what was going on. Only the staticky voices that bled into the room from the radio gave them any information. Several calls about violent attacks came through, as well as many emergency backup requests. On the 5th day of being locked up, no one had brought them food, and there wasn't anyone in sight. "Hey, is there anyone out there?" Dallas yelled. "Pigs forgot us," Carlos said, and he was about to launch into a tirade on where they could shove their donuts when a gurgling sound cut him short. It came from the other room. "What is that?" Carlos said. "I don't know, but I don't like the sound of it, especially not after the living nightmare we saw." The half-cracked door to the main office slowly began to open, revealing a monstrosity similar to the first one they had seen. Its large head was a deep purple blooming flower with a single large spike sticking out of the center of the bud, and several similar large spikes could be seen growing all along the rest of its body. It turned toward them, a putrid smell washing over them, a smell that could only be described as death incarnate. Several of the other prisoners began to gag as the sour smell invaded their noses, when all at once it shot out a large white splinter that cracked one of the iron bars of the cell and deflected upward before landing in the center of them. It advanced further into the room, walking toward the bars. "It's gonna shoot us like a damn fish in a barrel! We need to get out now!" Dallas shouted. A moment later, the creature started gurgling again and rearing back, as if it was going to fire another spike. It was practically on top of the bars at this point. Dallas jumped onto the ground, prone, as another splinter shot forward and pinned the scrawny man Dallas had come to know as Isaiah to the back of the wall, where he hung a full foot off the ground, limp. The gurgling began anew. Dallas scooped up the splinter on the ground and lunged forward, making an overhead stab down toward the creature's maw, which had pushed past the bars to make for cleaner shooting. He shish-kebabbed the pedals closed, sending the creature reeling back in pain. "Listen, everyone, get over here and push on the fucking bars, now!" Weary at first, everyone followed Carlos, who ran over to help Dallas, pushing on the cracked bars of the cell. The group of them managed to snap the bars, and they fell forward. "Out, now!" Each of them scrambled to leave the room and entered the main office, where two more of the creatures were wandering, somewhat aimlessly, toward the back of the room. Their outfits, recognizable as police uniforms, a shotgun lay on one desk, along with a box of shells and a baton. Carlos quickly picked it up and began loading shells. "I'll take the one in the cell area and take his gun." He leveled the pump and blew the flower clean off of its shoulders in a spray of somewhat beautiful petals. Dallas cautiously grabbed the 9mm pistol, and then when he was sure the creature wasn't going to get back up, he assisted in dispatching the two others in the office area. Luckily, they seemed to be somewhat unaware for whatever reason, making them easy enough targets. "Let's find the armory to this place, then regroup and brainstorm a safe point," Dallas said, his mind working in overdrive as his stomach turned from the overwhelming smell that now permeated every inch of the police station. The station was small enough, so it was quick work finding the small armory, where most of the weapons had been kept. Luckily, it had been left open. Unluckily, it was mostly cleaned out. "Only a couple of batons and a few shells," Noah said, digging through the remnants of the gear. "Let's check the evidence room," Carlos suggested. They weren't disappointed. They found inside 2 custom assault rifles and Noah's Tokarev. They also found a bottle of cord, the very drug they had been hearing about before everything went wrong. It looked rather clinical, a small orange pill bottle with what looked to be a stretched out vine being sliced by a scalpel. The label read, "Cut the cord of depression." Dallas thumbed the bottle. So this is the reason I've been living in a nightmare. Alright, look for any food and medical supplies, and be sure to have a weapon with you. After gathering what was salvageable, they met in the office area where the bodies of the infected still lay. I'm actually relieved they haven't gotten back up, Carlos said. Believe me, I am too, Dallas reciprocated. The discussion came up of where to go next, and after much deliberation, they decided the mill they worked at would be the best base of operation. It's far enough out of the way that no one will bother us much, and I'm sure if we stayed here we'd be swamped by looters before too long. Looking outside, the streets looked absolutely deserted, minus a single overturned police car in the center of the main road. Listen, stay silent, and follow my movement. Their movements were slow and a little uncoordinated, but as they made their way through one small grouping of creatures after another, the movements became more quick, more refined. Eventually, they found themselves in a vehicle and on their way to what very quickly became their headquarters. Months passed, and they formed small teams that would go out for supplies. Dallas taught the group some basic combat techniques and first aid skills. Before long, they had a small township of some 30 survivors. Just under half of them were children. Just more mouths to feed, Noah had complained. They were lucky enough to find plenty of canned goods on most of their raids, but what they really needed were antibiotics. The smallest cut could prove fatal, especially with the zombie-like creatures that their township had dubbed Cordyceps. People started calling Dallas the leprechaun, because he genuinely believed in a better tomorrow for what was left of the future generation. He was popular amongst the children, and soon became the de facto leader of the group. The kids called them the Jacks, since most of them still had their plaid shirts and overalls from work to wear. The name quickly stuck, and it became a point of pride, so much so that even those who came into the township afterwards found themselves outfitted in the same attire. But as weeks grew on, the same problem appeared. We needed more medicine. Dallas finally came up with a solution. Calling a couple people around in a circle, he smiled. Tomorrow we fix our problem. We're hitting the asylum tomorrow. Hospital is probably teeming with those things. Noah and Jones, you are on team 1. Carlos, you're with me. Auxiliary team, prep and hold perimeter. Breaching the asylum proved easy enough. There were a few dead chained to the med bay and a straggler in the cafeteria. Dallas and Carlos had joined with the auxiliary team when Jones and Noah came back with a man and a woman. More survivors, huh? Wait, did they attack you? Jones shared the story of Noah's uncouth actions, and Dallas laid him to rest. Now here we sit, Dallas said as he finished his tale with a smile back at his two passengers. Grit had to admit, he sat more comfortably now that he knew a little more about the man behind the steering wheel, and about what exactly caused the outbreak of these creatures here. Grit swallowed hard as he thought about his first encounter with these creatures, which had ended in the demise of his family. He was about to open his mouth to say something about this when Dallas spoke up. Look, I know you don't know much about us, and we'll be happy to have you back at the camp with us. The only thing is you both are healthy and seem to be able to handle yourselves. We need that, now more than ever, now that Noah is gone. He was a total asshole and deserved everything he got. But he could handle himself, and to be perfectly honest, that's a bit of a rarity in itself. We'll be stopping back at camp for chow. Then we'll be heading back out on a scavenger run. If you're to join our crew, you need to earn your keep. Grit and Eliza silently mulled over his words as they finished the rest of the drive. The sea of motionless cars they wove the Humvee around pressed home the absolute devastation that these creatures had wrought on the world. Grit could feel a hard lump forming in his throat as his mind conjured up images of hundreds or thousands of cordyceps rampaging through the city, devouring everything in their way. A feeling of utter hopelessness started to worm its way toward his heart. That was, until he saw the large log walls erected to barricade a multiple-story log cabin. A huge steel door was attached to these walls, and it slowly was pulled open by a couple of muscled middle-aged men as the Humvee and its procession made its way into the enclosure. Dallas chuckled and smiled. Welcome to the home of the Jacks. And your home, now that you're part of our crew. They all climbed out of the vehicle, and after fishing around in the back of the Humvee for a minute, Dallas pulled out a couple of cans of baked beans, and also Noah's old Tokarov, and the now loaded pistol Eliza had been wielding. Handing these items to Grit and Eliza, he smiled. Jones approached soon after Eliza and Grit went into the cabin. Listen, Leprechaun, I'm not 100% about giving every survivor a weapon right off the bat. And they're from an asylum, for God's sake. Dallas shrugged his shoulders. Call it a hunch. I think they'll be all right. Jones looked irate. We're betting our lives on a hunch, Leprechaun? Dallas turned and re-entered the cabin, Jones close behind him. Hey, Grit, we're planning a raid to find more food. I want you there. Come on. Grit still seemed a bit reluctant, but Eliza pushed him out the door while pointing to the can of baked beans with a crooked finger. They went to the hub, a small office area, where a couple of shitty computers and bad coffee were on standby. There was a city map in the center of a large table, and small cloth pins marked each key location. Red pins are hotspots, blue are supply points, and clear ones are expended supply points. We cleaned out the Piggly Wiggly on Hillsborough. Now we're going for this one on MLK Boulevard. Just because the mark is blue doesn't mean it isn't dangerous. We've run into scavenger groups along with monsters that seem to be all over the damn place. Bolts seem to work, but we've only got so many of those too. Grit, you're going with Carlos. Jones with me. I'll have a couple of extras secure the perimeter around the storefront. Their job is to warn us if a horde approaches. These things mostly come in small packs, but once a couple know we're there, more and more and more seem to appear. We especially need to be wary of the mutated varieties. We have seen all kinds of these freaky creatures. The normal ones aren't so bad, but mutations are a serious threat. I don't want to see any more of us die. Get a nap, and I'll come and get you when we're ready to head out. He decided he needed some sleep himself. Dallas had barely nodded off when he was woken by one of the children, a young girl named Ashton. Mr. Leprechaun, I made this for you. Sorry I woke you up. She handed him a crude drawing of him firing a rifle at a scribble of black lines. Thank you so much for keeping us safe. She gave him a brief hug and then ran off. He sat up, realizing there was no way he was going to get back to sleep. After grabbing some of the terrible coffee and heading up to get Grit, he was surprised to see Grit was already sitting at the edge of his bed, lacing up his boots. All right then, let's do this. They were taking the expressway up the 14 miles and then cutting over to MLK from there. The hike took the better part of the morning. They managed to the outside of the building, where they saw a group of men with gas masks and rifles posted outside the door. Get down! Keep quiet! Dallas called to them, and the 7 in the group looked over from the ruin of a gas station. Take up position. If they aren't friendly, this could turn into a serious firefight. He had started to get up when he heard a screaming woman who had been dragged out of the building by her dirty blonde hair. She was mostly exposed to the elements. Mud was caking her skin and her undergarments, the only thing protecting her from the cold. The man who had hold of her hair threw her forward, and the 2 who were in front started toward her and began binding her with chains. Dallas ground his teeth, a white-knuckle grip on the stock of his gun. I'll make a distraction, Carlos. Kill the ones holding the woman. We'll use that as a cue to open fire from there. Do not hit the woman. He looked around and found a large rock. Dallas snuck round back and made his way across the street. Then he threw the large rock at a rubbish bin 10 yards away. The sound brought an intense beat to his steady heart. He was in enemy territory, and the show was about to begin. A shot rang out, and chaos ensued. The woman continued to scream as clap after clap rang out. Dallas turned the corner, and one of the men looked at him from behind his now exposed cover. The man's face went ashen as he saw Dallas. "We're flanked! We're—" Grit dropped 2 of them, and the last one was cleaned up by Carlos. "All right, get me a perimeter now. I don't know if any of those damn monsters heard the gunfire, or if there's any more of them. Expect company. Let's be swift, people. We need to get the goods and go. Medic, see that woman." The teams moved out. Each person piled as many canned goods as would fit into the large green duffel bags as possible. They were finishing their sweep when they came upon a locked door in the back. As Grit approached it, some faint muffled noise came from inside. Carlos leveled the pump at the handle and blew it off. The door swung open, revealing a man bound to a chair. "Looks like another one of those scavengers. Must have broke code or something." Carlos leveled his gun at his head. "You want them dead, Vato?" Dallas raised a hand and pushed down the barrel. "No, Grit. Come here. Listen, this man was with that group. He's probably tied up and gagged for a reason. Question is, does he deserve death? Is it worth questioning him? What should we do with him?" Now, dear listeners, it's your turn to decide. Is he guilty by association? Maybe he should just be killed. Not worth the risk of talking to him. Maybe he could talk his way out of things and become dangerous. Should they question him, then kill him anyway? Maybe take him back to camp. Everyone deserves a chance, right? Or loosen his bonds, then leave him. He's just another mouth to feed anyway, and he can never be trusted. Or something else. It's all up to you, my dear listeners. Just comment down below or vote in the comments on the ones that have already been put in the comments. The one with the most likes by the time we write the next part of our story will be the direction we go. Remember, this is your story. We're just helping write it for you. I love being able to make these stories for you. To be able to help us continue doing that, please like, comment, and subscribe and share it with your friends. And finally, like always, remember that we care and that we're happy to have you along for the ride. So, until next time, let's write a story. Let's play a game without the dice.